At 29 years old, Eliza Harrow had been turned out of the only home she had ever known after the death of her uncle, when a distant creditor declared every possession forfeit against debts she had never created, leaving her with nothing but $8 worn dollars folded inside the pocket of her faded traveling skirt. And in a decision that every soul in the little river town of Ashcombe, Kansas considered foolish beyond reason, she paid every last cent for a dusty, abandoned print shop that leaned crookedly beside the neglected freight depot, unaware that somewhere behind its warped walls, a concealed cabinet protected the missing piece of a mystery that would not only change the course of her own life, but restore the forgotten truth upon which an entire community had unknowingly been built. Settle in and let us tell you the story of Eliza Harrow. If you're watching from a place that sometimes feels forgotten, tell us where you're listening from in the comments, because every overlooked place carries a story waiting for someone willing to uncover it. There are people who inherit wealth, people who inherit names, and people who inherit burdens so quietly that the world mistakes their endurance for ordinary living. We have often found that the strongest among us belong to the third kind, for they learn long before comfort arrives that usefulness matters more than praise, patience lasts longer than applause, and careful hands can preserve what hurried generations would gladly throw away. Eliza Harrow belonged to that quiet company. She first opened her eyes during the spring of 1872 on the outskirts of Ashcombe, where prairie grass stretched farther than a child's imagination, and every sunrise seemed determined to repaint the horizon with brighter colors than the morning before. Her father, Nathaniel Harrow, repaired wagons for farmers traveling westward, while her mother, Miriam, possessed a gift far rarer than stitching cloth or preparing meals. She understood words. In a town where many adults signed documents with little more than an uncertain mark, Miriam read newspapers aloud each evening beneath the yellow glow of an oil lamp. She believed stories held communities together, just as surely as nails held together wooden houses. When neighbors gathered during storms, she would unfold newspapers from cities hundreds of miles away, reading reports of elections, harvests, inventions, disasters, celebrations, and births, until strangers sitting shoulder to shoulder felt connected to places they would never see. Young Eliza rarely understood the events themselves, but she watched faces instead. She watched lonely widowers smile at cheerful reports. She watched tired mothers straighten their backs when reading about schools opening in distant territories. She watched old veterans close their eyes while listening to speeches that reminded them the nation they had once defended continued to grow. Words, she learned, carried weight beyond ink. Her father taught equally valuable lessons without speaking nearly as much. Every broken wheel arriving at his workshop seemed beyond repair to its owner, yet Nathaniel would kneel quietly beside the damage, running rough fingertips across cracked oak as though listening instead of looking. He often told Eliza that wood remembered the hands that shaped it. "Nothing built with care wishes to stay broken forever," he would say. Whenever he replaced an axle or strengthened a weakened spoke, he explained every step, inviting Eliza to hold tools larger than her own arms could comfortably manage. She learned patience before strength, observation before action, and humility before confidence. Those lessons became all the more precious after sickness arrived during one bitter winter. Influenza swept across neighboring farms with little concern for fairness. Within 12 cold days, Miriam's gentle reading voice disappeared forever. Nathaniel survived only 3 weeks longer before exhaustion and fever carried him after her. Eliza had scarcely reached 12 years of age. No child should become familiar with silence so young, yet silence became her companion. Her mother's brother, Walter Fenwick, arrived from another county after the funerals. He was neither cruel nor especially affectionate. He simply believed responsibility should be accepted without complaint. Owning a modest warehouse supplying paper, ink, and bookkeeping ledgers across several counties, Walter understood business more comfortably than grief. He brought Eliza into his household. His home lacked laughter, yet it offered safety. His meals appeared on schedule. His roof did not leak. His expectations remained simple. Work honestly, Waste nothing. Speak truthfully. Eliza accepted every task without hesitation. She swept storerooms. She inventoried crates. She repaired torn account books using needle and thread so carefully that repaired pages became stronger than before. Walter gradually noticed something uncommon. She remembered details, not merely numbers, but patterns. She could recall which customer preferred heavier stationery, which school teacher purchased blue ink instead of black, which church ordered hymn sheets every autumn, and which merchant delayed payments each harvest because floods regularly damaged his farmland. Information arranged itself inside her memory like books upon orderly shelves. Walter eventually trusted her with correspondence. She copied invoices in beautiful handwriting. She balanced accounts. She corrected arithmetic errors that experienced clerks overlooked. Still, her favorite destination remained the old Ashcombe Gazette print shop standing near the railway siding. Its owner, Mr. Isaiah Mercer, had once operated the busiest newspaper for nearly 80 miles. As a child accompanying paper deliveries, Eliza became fascinated by the rhythmic thunder of the hand-operated printing press. Metal type rested neatly inside shallow drawers. Letters assembled into words. Words became pages. Pages traveled across counties. She often believed the building itself breathed. Ink carried a scent unlike anything else. Warm metal, fresh paper, lamp oil, wooden shelves worn smooth by decades of careful work. Isaiah noticed the curious girl watching from the doorway. Instead of sending her away, he invited questions. Why did certain letters wear out sooner than others? Because truth used common words more often than impressive ones. Why were newspapers printed overnight? Because news delayed became history instead of guidance. Why keep old editions stacked inside storage rooms? Because today's forgotten page often becomes tomorrow's missing evidence. Those words lingered. Today's forgotten page often becomes tomorrow's missing evidence. Years passed. Railroads expanded. Larger city newspapers reached Ashcombe before Isaiah could finish printing local editions. Advertising revenue dwindled. Younger families preferred sensational headlines from distant cities rather than careful reporting of neighboring lives. Eventually, Isaiah closed the Gazette. The building remained locked. Dust gathered behind windows. Children invented ghost stories about the abandoned press. Travelers scarcely noticed it anymore. Yet whenever Eliza walked past, she still slowed her steps. She imagined forgotten headlines sleeping inside those walls. She imagined shelves filled with careful records no one bothered remembering. She imagined history waiting patiently beneath blankets of dust. Walter occasionally smiled at her fascination. One day, he remarked while loading supplies into a wagon, someone foolish enough will buy that collapsing place. Eliza smiled politely. She secretly hoped someone would. Because abandoned things deserved second chances. She believed that as firmly as her father had believed broken wagons wished to roll again. She did not know that life would one day ask whether she truly meant those convictions. Years flowed onward with quiet steadiness. Walter aged. His eyesight weakened. His business depended more heavily upon Eliza's capable management. Neighbors assumed she would inherit everything. After all, she had earned it. She had devoted 17 years to preserving accounts, maintaining warehouses, serving customers honestly, and protecting every ledger with unwavering care. But expectations and reality rarely travel together. When Walter died unexpectedly after suffering a stroke during late autumn, condolences filled the house for 3 days. On the fourth morning, a sharply dressed attorney arrived carrying documents that no one else had seen. And with those papers came the beginning of Eliza Harrow's fall. On the fourth morning, a sharply dressed attorney arrived carrying documents that no one else had seen. He introduced himself as Horace Bell, representing lenders from Topeka who had financed Walter Fenwick's warehouse expansion nearly a decade earlier. Walter had spoken little of loans. He believed burdens became lighter when carried alone, though history has often shown the opposite. One unpaid renewal after another had quietly gathered until the debt exceeded the value of everything he owned. The warehouse, the wagons, The inventory, the home, even the furniture were no longer truly his. They belonged to signatures placed upon paper years before. Horace Bell did not speak cruelly. His voice remained polished and almost apologetic, which somehow wounded more deeply than anger would have. Every ledger Eliza had balanced with such care, every shelf she had dusted, every crate she had organized, every mile she had traveled to deliver supplies, had not been enough to save the business from obligations hidden beneath respectable bookkeeping. She requested permission to examine the accounts herself. He agreed. For 2 long days she compared invoices, receipts, interest notices, and correspondence, until her eyes blurred beneath lamplight. There was no mistake. Walter had not stolen. He had not gambled. He had simply believed each successful harvest would erase the previous year's losses. Then drought arrived. Then floods. Then 2 freight accidents destroyed valuable shipments before they ever reached customers. The debts had quietly grown while Walter smiled before neighbors and insisted business remained healthy. Eliza closed the final ledger with trembling hands. Sometimes honesty alone cannot rescue a person from arithmetic. The auction took place beneath a pale November sky. Neighbors gathered because auctions always attracted curiosity. Some attended hoping to purchase tools. Others came merely to witness another family's misfortune. Eliza stood beside the porch, wearing her mother's old gray shawl, watching strangers carry away the ordinary pieces of her life one by one. A dining table upon which birthdays had once been celebrated. Walter's rocking chair. Shelves she had built herself. The brass clock that had measured nearly 2 decades inside that house. Boxes of books. Kitchen pots polished so often they reflected faces like mirrors. Everything acquired a price. Very little acquired respect. People examined belongings not for memories but for bargains. By afternoon the house echoed. The walls themselves seemed surprised by their own emptiness. One elderly farmer quietly approached Eliza before leaving. "I remember your father," he said. She smiled sadly. "So do I." He removed his hat. "He'd tell you broken things still wish to be useful." She nodded. "I remember that too." After the sale concluded, Horace Bell handed her a small cloth pouch. "These remain after legal expenses." She untied the string. $8. 8 lonely silver dollars. Nothing more. Nearly 17 years of faithful labor had ended with 8 coins resting against her palm. Winter announced itself early that year. Ashcombe grew quieter beneath gray skies. Without employment or property, Eliza rented a narrow room above Mrs. Brenner's boarding house. The wallpaper peeled from damp walls, and cold winds slipped through gaps around the window frame. Yet Mrs. Brenner accepted reduced payment in exchange for help preparing meals and mending linens. Pride never prevented Eliza from working. She scrubbed floors before sunrise. She stitched torn blankets after supper. She copied legal notices for the town clerk whenever extra pennies became available. Still, employment remained uncertain. Businesses preferred hiring men for bookkeeping. Women, they argued politely, would someday marry. Eliza offered no argument. Instead, she quietly searched. Each morning, she walked every street in Ashcombe. She noticed buildings others ignored. Empty storefronts, collapsed sheds, weathered barns, abandoned workshops, places where usefulness had simply fallen asleep. One snowy afternoon, she wandered farther than usual until reaching the railway siding. There it stood, the Ashcombe Gazette print shop. Its faded sign swung lazily against rusted chains. Dust coated every window. One shutter hung crooked upon broken hinges. Snow had gathered across the porch where no footprints appeared. It seemed smaller than childhood memories suggested. Older, wearier, yet somehow dignified. She rested one gloved hand against the weathered door. The wood remained solid beneath peeling paint, almost as though the building refused to surrender despite years of neglect. Across the street, old Mr. Wilkes noticed her. "You looking to buy ghosts?" he chuckled. She smiled. "Does anyone own it now?" "Railroad company took possession after Isaiah Mercer passed. I heard it never sold. It nearly did twice." "What happened?" He shrugged. Roof leaks. Press weighs more than a locomotive. Rats moved in before people moved out. Costs more fixing than it's worth. She continued studying the windows. What are they asking? Mr. Wilkes laughed aloud. They've stopped asking. Last notice I saw said anybody willing to haul responsibility away could have the whole place for $8. She looked toward him. 8? The exact amount. He grinned. Though I wouldn't pay 8 cents. That evening, Eliza scarcely slept. She thought about Isaiah's words. Today's forgotten page often becomes tomorrow's missing evidence. She remembered the smell of fresh ink, the careful arrangement of metal type. The pride Isaiah carried whenever another edition rolled from the press. Buildings possessed memories too. Perhaps abandoned places merely waited for someone willing to listen. The following morning, she visited the railway office. A young station clerk searched through neglected files. Yes, he confirmed after several minutes. Property number 14. Former Ashcombe Gazette. Sale authorized to recover maintenance costs. What condition? He smiled awkwardly. The roof leaks. So I've heard. The cellar floods after heavy rain. I've heard that too. The windows need replacing. She nodded patiently. The chimney leans. He hesitated. And people believe it's unlucky. She almost laughed. Is bad luck included in the purchase price? He blinked. I suppose so. She carefully removed her cloth pouch. One by one, the 8 silver dollars rested upon the worn counter. Their soft metallic sounds echoed inside the quiet office. The clerk counted twice. He looked at her with genuine concern. Miss Harrow, are you certain? No. Then perhaps reconsider. She smiled gently. I've reconsidered for 3 nights. He sighed. I'll prepare the deed. By midday, she held a single folded document declaring ownership of the abandoned print shop. $8 had purchased warped walls, broken windows, leaking ceilings, forgotten machinery, and a reputation for hopelessness. When townspeople learned what she had done, conversation spread faster than prairie fire. Poor Eliza had finally surrendered to desperation. Grief had clouded her judgment. No sensible woman would invest her final coins in an abandoned newspaper office. Even Mrs. Brenner frowned kindly. You cannot live on old ink. No, Eliza answered softly. But perhaps I can live beside old truth. Mrs. Brenner did not understand. Neither did Eliza entirely. She only knew that something inside the building continued calling to her, exactly as it had when she was a little girl watching printed pages emerge from Isaiah Mercer's faithful press. The next morning, she unlocked the front door. The hinges groaned like someone waking from a very long sleep. Dust drifted through pale winter sunlight, pouring between cracked shutters. The familiar scent remained. Old paper, dry cedar, iron, ink that had long since hardened. Time itself seemed preserved inside those walls. Nothing had been rearranged since Isaiah's final day. Metal type still rested inside hundreds of tiny compartments. Bundles of newspapers leaned against shelves. Calendars remained open to years already forgotten. A coffee cup rested upon a desk beside spectacles whose owner would never return. Silence filled every corner. Yet it felt peaceful rather than abandoned. She removed her coat, picked up a broom, and began working. For 3 days she swept. Dust rose so thickly it shimmered like smoke beneath afternoon sunlight. Spiderwebs disappeared from ceiling beams. Broken chairs were repaired, shelves straightened. Windows opened despite years of stubborn neglect. She discovered old subscription lists, family announcements, school programs, election notices, boxes containing printing plates engraved with illustrations no one had seen for decades. Each discovery felt less like cleaning a building and more like introducing herself to forgotten neighbors. On the 4th afternoon, she finally reached Isaiah Mercer's office at the rear of the shop. His desk remained exactly as he had left it. Pens, ledgers, a brass paperweight shaped like an eagle. Receipts bundled neatly with faded ribbon. Nothing unusual appeared. Yet while dusting one bookcase, she noticed something curious. The shelves stood several inches farther from the wall than necessary. Too far. She measured with her hand. The spacing seemed deliberate. Her father's voice returned across memory. Nothing built with care wishes to stay broken forever. She knelt, ran her fingertips along the baseboard. The wood sounded different near one corner. Not hollow exactly, hidden. She brushed away decades of dust and found the faint outline of a narrow wooden panel so perfectly joined that no casual observer would ever notice it. Her heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. Careful hands first, curiosity second. She pressed gently against the panel. Nothing happened. Then she noticed an old brass printing block lying alone upon Isaiah's desk, engraved with the letter G. It seemed oddly worn compared with the others, almost as though it had been handled countless times rather than used for printing. She lifted it. The underside carried a tiny iron peg, not for ink, not for paper, for something else. Her eyes returned to the hidden panel. Near its edge rested a nearly invisible opening, precisely the size of that small iron peg. Eliza held her breath as she carefully raised the brass letter toward the concealed slot, never imagining that the quiet click waiting beneath her fingertips would awaken a mystery that Ashcombe had unknowingly carried for more than 30 years. The brass letter slid smoothly into the opening as though it had been waiting there all along. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, from somewhere behind the bookcase, she heard the faintest metallic release, so soft that another person might have mistaken it for the settling of old timber. The shelf shifted less than an inch. She gently pressed against its edge, and the entire cabinet swung outward upon hidden iron hinges, so carefully balanced that even after decades they moved with remarkable grace. Dust drifted into the narrow space beyond, glittering in the pale afternoon light, like tiny stars awakening after a long night. The compartment was much deeper than she expected. Isaiah Mercer had not hidden valuables in haste. He had commissioned someone who understood craftsmanship as well as secrecy. Cedar boards lined the interior to protect whatever rested there from dampness. Brass fittings resisted rust. Even the hinges had been coated with oil before the cabinet was sealed, preserving them through the passing years. Only 3 objects occupied the hidden chamber: a narrow wooden chest wrapped in oilcloth, a thick leather-bound ledger secured with a faded blue ribbon, and a cylindrical tin document case whose lid bore Isaiah Mercer's initials pressed neatly into the metal. No gold coins spilled across the floor. No glittering jewels reflected the sunlight. Instead, everything suggested that whoever concealed these items valued truth more than wealth. Eliza carefully lifted the wooden chest first. It felt unexpectedly heavy. She carried it to Isaiah's desk before returning for the ledger and the document case. Only when everything rested safely upon the broad oak surface did she close the concealed cabinet again, leaving it exactly as she had found it. She did not yet know whether she had uncovered history or merely someone's forgotten keepsakes. Either deserved respect. She untied the weathered cord surrounding the chest. Inside lay hundreds of tiny metal printing plates, unlike those arranged in ordinary newspaper drawers. These had been engraved by hand. Each plate contained signatures, official seals, property boundaries, maps of farms, railway routes, bridge designs, school charters, church records, and town agreements. Every engraving represented an original master plate from which official public notices could be printed. She frowned. Those plates should never have been inside a private hiding place. Such records normally belonged in county offices. Beneath them rested a folded sheet, written in Isaiah Mercer's familiar handwriting. If these words are being read, then years have passed beyond my imagining. Forgive the secrecy. Some truths cannot survive in plain sight. I have hidden only what others tried to destroy. Eliza slowly lowered the page. Destroy. She unfolded the remaining letter. If honest people still remain in Ashcombe, let them continue reading before judgment overtakes patience. The disappearance that divided this town was never an accident. Her heartbeat quickened. Every child raised in Ashcombe knew the old story. 32 years earlier, before Eliza had been born, The original township charter had mysteriously disappeared from the courthouse shortly before ownership of thousands of surrounding acres changed hands. Without the charter, property lines became uncertain. Small farmers lost claims. Larger investors purchased disputed land for almost nothing. People whispered endlessly. Some blamed a courthouse fire. Others insisted traveling thieves stole the records. Still others believed careless officials had simply misplaced them. No proof ever appeared. Eventually, everyone accepted uncertainty as permanent. Except, apparently, Isaiah Mercer. She reached for the leather ledger. The first pages appeared ordinary enough, listing newspaper subscriptions and advertising payments. Then the entries abruptly changed. Dates, names, private observations, meetings, conversations. Every page resembled the careful diary of a man documenting events he feared no one else would believe. March 3, 1864. Mr. Aldridge visited after sunset, requesting I print duplicate property notices bearing altered survey numbers. I refused. March 8. Surveyor Ellis confessed he had been pressured to redraw township boundaries. March 14. Judge Carver seemed deeply troubled. He fears someone intends to erase the original charter entirely. March 19. The charter has vanished. Eliza swallowed hard. She continued reading. April 2. They believe the missing charter destroyed. It is not. Judge Carver entrusted it to me after discovering corruption reached officials sworn to protect it. He believes newspapers outlive politicians. The entries became increasingly cautious. Some pages contained only initials. Others described strangers arriving from distant counties, railroad investors, speculators, lawyers. Every detail suggested a deliberate effort to seize land by making legitimate ownership impossible to prove. Near the ledger's center rested another folded letter, addressed simply, "To whoever values justice above comfort." She unfolded it carefully. If these pages have survived, then perhaps God has finally delivered them into honest hands. I have delayed publication because every witness willing to testify has either disappeared, departed west, or died. Printing accusations without proof would destroy innocent lives. Therefore, I preserved every piece of evidence until someone wiser than I could finish what fear prevented me from beginning. Isaiah. Eliza leaned back inside the old chair. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Outside, afternoon shadows stretched across empty streets, while freight cars rattled slowly through the depot, unaware that only yards away a forgotten mystery had quietly awakened. She opened the metal document case. Unlike the letters, its contents had been protected against moisture with extraordinary care. Rolled tightly inside rested several official documents bearing state seals, still remarkably clear despite the passing decades. She spread the first across Isaiah's desk. Her breath caught. It was the original township charter of Ashcombe. Not a copy, not a transcript. The original. Every signature remained visible. Every boundary carefully drawn. Every official seal intact. She examined the second document. A survey map. The third. Property transfer records. The fourth. Witness affidavits describing attempted bribery involving several influential businessmen whose descendants still occupied respected positions within Ashcombe. No wonder Isaiah had hidden everything. Publishing such evidence immediately might have cost him his life. Yet preserving it had cost the town something equally precious. The truth. For nearly 30 years, families had accepted losses they never deserved because the evidence proving their rights had vanished into silence. Eliza spent hours comparing names within Isaiah's ledger against notices stacked throughout the abandoned print shop. The deeper she searched, the more remarkable the pattern became. Isaiah had quietly preserved nearly every printed edition of the Ashcombe Gazette from its founding. Each newspaper contained small fragments of larger events. Announcements, council meetings, election results, survey corrections, bridge contracts, school funding. Nothing sensational. Yet together they formed a nearly complete public history. He had unknowingly created the perfect companion to the hidden evidence. If someone questioned the authenticity of one document, another newspaper confirmed it. If another record appeared uncertain, 3 editions printed years apart supported it. History itself seemed to speak with one consistent voice. Night settled unnoticed beyond the windows. Eliza finally lit an oil lamp. Golden light spilled across the scattered papers while snow drifted gently outside. She realized she had forgotten supper, forgotten time itself. At last, she carefully returned every document to its proper order. She would not carry them away. Not yet. Instead, she relocked the concealed cabinet and slipped Isaiah's brass letter G into her pocket. The key belonged with her until she understood what responsibility she had inherited. Before leaving, she looked once more across the silent print shop. The abandoned press stood motionless beneath layers of dust. Yet for the first time, she imagined it alive again. Not merely printing advertisements or announcements, printing truth. Printing the evidence Isaiah Mercer had protected for 3 decades. Perhaps that had always been his hope. Outside, the cold evening air stung her cheeks. Smoke curled from chimneys throughout Ashcombe. Families gathered around supper tables without the slightest idea that the forgotten print shop contained documents capable of rewriting the history of nearly every street surrounding them. As she crossed the snowy road, she noticed someone standing beneath the railway platform roof. The figure remained perfectly still, watching. The moment she looked directly toward him, he turned away and disappeared into the darkness between 2 freight cars. Perhaps it meant nothing. Perhaps merely another traveler waiting for the evening train. Yet instinct told her otherwise. Someone else knew the old print shop was no longer empty. And somewhere in Ashcombe, another pair of eyes had begun searching for the very secret Isaiah Mercer had sacrificed half his life to protect. Eliza slept little that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the original township charter spread across Isaiah Mercer's desk, its ink still dark enough to read, despite 3 silent decades. She remembered the figure beneath the railway platform as clearly as she remembered the hidden cabinet itself. Whether that stranger had merely sought shelter from the cold or watched her deliberately no longer seemed an idle question. The discovery had transformed the abandoned print shop from a forgotten building into the safest hiding place in Ashcombe, and perhaps the most dangerous place as well. Before dawn, she returned carrying only a lantern, a loaf of bread, and a small notebook. Fresh snow covered the street, making every footprint easy to notice. She paused before unlocking the front door. Someone had been there. One set of boot prints approached the porch during the night. The same tracks returned toward the depot. The door remained locked, the windows untouched. Whoever had visited had chosen not to force entry. That realization unsettled her even more. It suggested patience. Inside, she examined every room before breathing easily again. Nothing had been disturbed. The concealed cabinet remained invisible behind the shelves, and the brass letter G still rested safely inside her coat pocket. She spent the morning reading Isaiah's journal from beginning to end. The later entries became increasingly careful. He stopped recording full names. Instead, he used symbols, simple marks, a circle, a square, a triangle. At first they seemed meaningless, until Eliza noticed the same symbols penciled beside newspaper advertisements, preserved in bound volumes. Isaiah had created a private code connecting public events with confidential observations. It was the habit of a printer who understood that dangerous information sometimes survived only by hiding in plain sight. She began copying every coded reference into her notebook. Hours passed unnoticed. Gradually, the pattern emerged. The triangle represented Judge Carver. The square referred to Surveyor Ellis. The circle always marked a businessman named Silas Aldridge. Eliza frowned. She knew that surname. Edmund Aldridge, the wealthiest merchant in Ashcombe, often spoke proudly of his late grandfather Silas, describing him as one of the town's visionary founders. The Aldridge family owned grain warehouses, river docks, and nearly every storefront surrounding the courthouse square. Their generosity funded church repairs and school improvements. Their name appeared upon charitable plaques throughout the county. Yet Isaiah's journal painted a different portrait. Again and again, Silas Aldridge appeared beside entries concerning altered surveys, missing deeds, frightened witnesses, and suspicious meetings. No accusation stood alone. Each was supported by receipts, printed notices, sworn statements, or correspondence preserved elsewhere inside the hidden cabinet. Isaiah had not collected rumors. He had assembled evidence. Near noon, someone knocked gently upon the front door. Eliza quickly returned every document to the concealed compartment before answering. Outside stood Reverend Amos Whitfield, carrying a basket covered with cloth. "I heard you'd taken ownership of the place," he said warmly. "I have. I suspected you might forget to eat." She smiled for the first time that day. "You know me too well." The elderly minister stepped inside, looking around with quiet admiration. "It already feels different. I've only swept." "No." He shook his head. "You've returned purpose." They shared soup beside the old printing press, while winter sunlight crept slowly across the wooden floor. Reverend Whitfield glanced toward shelves filled with yellowed newspapers. "Isaiah would be pleased. You knew him well? We served this town together for many years. What kind of man was he?" The minister considered carefully before answering. The sort who believed truth belonged to everyone, even when telling it cost dearly. Eliza hesitated. Did he ever speak of the missing township charter? The old man's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. Why ask that? Only curiosity. His eyes lingered upon her for a long moment. "When I was younger," he said quietly, "I believed someone had hidden it rather than destroyed it. What changed your mind?" "Time," he sighed. "Time persuades us to stop asking difficult questions." She noticed sadness rather than certainty in his voice. "If it were ever found," she asked, "would anyone still care?" The minister looked toward the courthouse visible through dusty windows. "I believe the honest would. And the dishonest? They would care even more." After he departed, Eliza understood one thing clearly. She could trust Reverend Whitfield. Not yet with the documents themselves, but with the truth eventually. As afternoon faded, she resumed studying Isaiah's papers. Inside the document case, she discovered another envelope she had overlooked because it had slipped beneath the larger charter. Across the front, Isaiah had written only 3 words. "Open last." She carefully broke the brittle wax seal. Inside rested a single page. "If these records survive beyond my lifetime, do not surrender them to one official alone. Corruption rarely travels by itself. Make many copies. Let every household read what happened. Ink carried into many hands cannot easily be buried again." Eliza read those lines 3 times. She slowly turned toward the silent printing press occupying the center of the room. Isaiah had not hidden the evidence merely to preserve it. He had hidden it until someone could print it safely. Her gaze settled upon rows of metal type, shelves of paper, inkstones, printing plates. The press remained old but not ruined. She walked toward it, placed one hand upon the heavy iron frame, carefully tested the great lever. It resisted at first, then moved, slowly, smoothly. Years of dust had stiffened the joints but not destroyed them. She smiled. Her father's words echoed once more. Nothing built with care wishes to stay broken forever. For the next week, she devoted every daylight hour to restoring the press. She dismantled rollers, cleaned gears with lamp oil, removed hardened ink from iron surfaces, sharpened cutting blades, straightened bent type cases. At night, she borrowed manuals from the schoolteacher describing proper maintenance of 19th century presses. Mrs. Brenner laughed kindly when she returned each evening with blackened hands. "I believe you're becoming part machine, perhaps. But the machine is improving." Gradually, the press awakened. Its first movement produced an awful groan. The second sounded stronger. By the 10th day, the great flywheel turned with surprising confidence. Eliza prepared a single blank sheet beneath the platen. She selected only 4 words from loose type. "Truth waits patiently here." She lowered the press. The machine answered with a firm metallic thump unlike any sound heard in Ashcombe for years. She lifted the paper. The letters appeared crisp, dark, perfect. Without realizing it, she laughed aloud. The abandoned print shop had spoken again. That evening, another visitor arrived. This one introduced himself as Caleb Norris, editor of the larger newspaper published in the neighboring county. I heard someone revived Mercer's old press. Only barely. He looked around appreciatively. Quite an accomplishment. What brings you here? He removed his hat. I'd like to purchase the equipment. It isn't for sale. I'll offer $200. The amount startled her. It exceeded 25 times what she had paid for the entire building. No, 300. She smiled politely. You've come very quickly for a man merely interested in old machinery. His expression hardened almost imperceptibly. News travels. So it seems. I'd hate seeing you burden yourself with repairs. I appreciate the concern. You could begin life elsewhere. My life has already begun here. He studied her face carefully before speaking again. Some buildings remain abandoned for good reasons. And some, Eliza replied softly, remain abandoned because everyone repeats the same story without checking whether it's true. For the first time, his pleasant smile disappeared. If you change your mind, I won't. He left without another word. Eliza watched from the doorway as he climbed into a dark carriage waiting across the street. The driver immediately turned not toward the county road, but toward the large brick offices of Aldridge Mercantile. She remained standing in the cold until the carriage vanished from sight. Perhaps the visit had been coincidence. Perhaps not. But one thing now seemed undeniable. Word that the old print shop had come back to life was spreading faster than she intended. And somewhere beyond those snowy streets, people whose families had prospered for 30 years under the shelter of a forgotten mystery were beginning to wonder exactly what Eliza Harrow might have found inside a building everyone else had been content to leave buried beneath dust. Spring arrived slowly in Ashcombe, but when it finally came, it carried more than warmer winds. It carried truth. Eliza spent weeks making careful copies of every document Isaiah Mercer had protected for so many years. Reverend Whitfield, the county judge from a neighboring district, and 2 respected schoolteachers examined each page independently. They compared signatures, official seals, newspaper editions, survey maps, and witness statements until there could be no honest doubt about what had happened. The original township charter was authenticated. The altered surveys were exposed. The hidden ledger matched public records preserved inside the print shop. What had once been dismissed as an old legend became undeniable history. Rather than handing everything to a single office, Eliza honored Isaiah's final instruction. The restored printing press worked from sunrise until long after sunset. Sheet after sheet emerged, carrying the complete account of the missing charter, the concealed evidence, and the rightful boundaries of the township. Farmers who had believed their grandparents simply lost their land through misfortune now discovered many of those losses had begun with deliberate deception. Families gathered in church halls and schoolhouses reading the printed pages aloud, just as Eliza's mother had once read newspapers beneath the glow of an oil lamp. Truth traveled from hand to hand faster than rumors ever had. Some people wept quietly. Others sat in stunned silence. Many remembered stories told by grandparents that had never quite made sense until that moment. Legal proceedings followed, not with angry crowds or violent confrontations, but with careful examination of facts that could no longer be ignored. Land that had been taken through fraudulent surveys was compensated where possible. Public records were corrected. Community buildings funded by disputed property revenues were transferred into public trusts so that every citizen benefited equally. Ashcombe chose restoration over revenge. The Aldridge family could not escape the shadow of their own history. Edmund Aldridge himself had committed none of the original wrongdoing, yet the fortune he proudly inherited had rested upon foundations laid by deception. When every document became public, he resigned from the town council without protest. Large portions of the family's disputed holdings were surrendered through legal settlement. The warehouses remained, but their profits helped establish a public library, a new schoolhouse, and scholarships for children whose families had suffered generations of quiet loss. It was not humiliation that became his punishment. It was the lifelong knowledge that the respect his family once enjoyed had to be earned again, rather than inherited. As for Caleb Norris, his hurried attempts to purchase the abandoned print shop suddenly made perfect sense. Letters discovered among Isaiah's papers revealed that his newspaper's founder had once agreed to suppress certain reports in exchange for profitable advertising from powerful businessmen. Caleb had hoped those old records would remain hidden forever. Instead, the evidence became part of the public archive, and his newspaper was forced to publish the full truth in its own pages. The dusty print shop no longer stood abandoned. Children visited to watch the old press turn once again. Teachers brought students to learn how newspapers had preserved history. Travelers stopped simply to see the little building that had changed the fate of an entire town. Above the front door, Eliza painted a modest new sign, the Ashcombe Chronicle. Not because she wished for fame, but because every community deserved an honest record of its own story. She never became wealthy. She never sought recognition. Whenever grateful neighbors thanked her, she always pointed toward the restored press and smiled. "It was never hidden for me," she would say. It was hidden for the day Ashcombe was ready to hear the truth. Years later, visitors often asked why she had spent her final $8 on a building everyone else considered worthless. She would simply rest one hand upon the weathered printing press and answer with the quiet certainty earned through hardship. "My father taught me that nothing built with care wishes to stay broken forever. I only believed him." And perhaps that was the greatest treasure concealed behind Isaiah Mercer's cabinet. Not merely a missing charter or forgotten evidence, but the reminder that truth may sleep beneath dust for years, yet it never loses its worth. Honest hands may arrive late, but they are never too late. Communities are not restored by those who seek riches for themselves. They are restored by ordinary people willing to preserve what others overlook and protect what others would rather forget. So when we remember the woman who stood alone with only $8 in her pocket, we do not remember her because she became the owner of an old print shop. We remember Eliza Harrow because she chose hope when everyone else chose certainty. She looked beyond broken windows and dusty floors. She saw purpose where others saw failure, and by refusing to abandon what the world had discarded, she gave an entire town the chance to reclaim its own history. The forgotten building became the heartbeat of Ashcombe once more, and the young woman everyone pitied became the quiet guardian of its truth. Thank you for spending this journey with us through the forgotten streets of Ashcombe and the remarkable courage of Eliza Harrow. If this story reminded you that even the smallest act of faith can uncover something priceless, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, what is a time you found value in something everyone else had written off? If you enjoy heartfelt frontier stories filled with hidden history, quiet courage, and unforgettable discoveries, please like this video, subscribe to Berry Tales, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another journey into the forgotten corners of the Old West. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and stay close.